Let's get started, everybody. Good morning.
Morning.
My name is Hannah McDonald. I am the Western Massachusetts Regenerative Food Systems Coordinator for NOFA. I'm also an agroforestry project coordinator. And today we are meeting with Dani Baker and going to be talking about perennial edible forest gardens. So a couple of things before we get started. We want to start off by acknowledging the land that we're on today, Nipmuc territory, Worcester, Massachusetts, and really just all of the history behind this area, and appreciating and acknowledging that the land that we now farm has been built on stolen land and stolen labor. And we acknowledge that history, and we are moving forward to remediate it together. And to learn more about whose land you're on, please, if you haven't yet, go to the nativeland.ca. It's a really, really valuable resource. I've learned a lot through going on. Some other things that NOFA is doing that you can do is support other ventures in racial equity in our food system. There's a lot of really great organizations throughout New England and nationally, for that matter, who are advancing food justice and racial equity. We encourage you to support those entities. Sorry, this little bar here is kind of getting in my way. We also have some caucus groups today that I highly encourage that the folks in person attend. There'll be a white ally caucus group for white folks to come and talk about how we can dismantle and acknowledge racism in our food system and socially, culturally, and then a room for our BIPOC folks too to sort through. So we ask that if you are a white or a BIPOC identifying person, please go to your respective rooms so that we can hold that space safe for everybody who is attending. And a great thank you to our sponsors, High Mowing Seeds, Vermont Compost, and some of our supporter level sponsors. And please visit our auction website. We got some really good stuff going on. Support us, support these companies, support yourself with some great books and food and other awesome ways to be your best farmer that you can be. And at the end of this, we'll have a survey that you can fill out, and I'll drop those links in the chat. And then I can't quite remember how I get it to the in-person folks, but there is a survey that we can take to report back how you like this session and how the conference is going for you in general. Oops, this is not the right thing. Okay, sorry about that. I'll stop my share. And I ask that if you are on, okay, there we go. Had to do some weird admin stuff there. Okay, and this is Dani Baker. And we'll be talking about native perennial food plants for your edible landscapes. Dani is a retired clinical psychologist and self-taught gardener and photographer who learned her craft by immersing herself in reading, poring over her nursery catalogs, attending workshops on permaculture and gardening, and enthusiastic trial and error experimentation. Her enchanted edible forest garden is located at Cross Island Farms on Wellesley Island in the St. Lawrence River between New York and Canada. There, she and her partner David grow organic produce, raise grass-fed beef and goats, and she conducts workshops and tours in her edible garden, as well as giving presentations at conferences such as these. And she's got a couple books out, so you can go ahead and check out her bio on the website, and where you'll find a bunch of our other presenters too. And with that, I will turn it over to Dani.
Okay.
Dani, you let me know if you need any help, all right?
All right. Here we are. Okay, well, thank you all for attending and thank you for having me. So today I'm going to talk about native perennial food plants for your edible landscape. I think I'm going to go over 20 or 25 of them that I'm most familiar with, but there are many, many more. And there's actually a USDA website where you can find detailed descriptions of just about every single plant that's in the United States and its territories if you want to do some further research. Okay, just to show you where I'm located, the little star there is where my farm is. We're on an island in the middle of the St. Lawrence River, and we're about 2 hours south of Ottawa, and we're in hardiness zone 4. So this is our logo. Our farm is actually located at the base of that windmill on Wellesley Island, which is about a 9-mile long island that's actually interstate accessed. So we don't need a boat to get to and from. And we have about 102 acres on the farm. As mentioned in the bio, we're quite diverse. We raise meat goats, we raise beef cows, we have some hogs, and also annual vegetables. And we host, lower left, we host volunteers year round. We participate in the WOOF program. On the upper right, we do have 4 rustic campsites on our farm. Upper left, we give tours, and that's a picture of me giving a tour in the edible forest. And lower right, we also host events. So the farm's been operating for 17 years, and 10 years ago, I got inspired by a talk by Steve Gabriel, 2-hour talk about permaculture. I'd never heard the word before, and I was so excited by the concepts. I decided there and then I was going to plant an edible forest. And I came home and I told my partner, he built me a fence to keep the deer out, and the rest is history. So the forest has now been, I started planting it 10 years ago, and we have UPIC in the garden by appointment. We give tours, workshops, and we also have hosted events, mostly in cooperation with like fundraisers for partnering with not-for-profits in the area and having events to raise funds for them. So I have a few slides just to show you the garden in the few different seasons. So this is kind of early summer. And by the way, peonies are edible flowers. This is July when the cherries are ripe. And a later summer view with the leaves just starting to turn on the apricot tree, a fall view, and a winter view. And this is about what it looks like right now because we just had some snow yesterday. So, virtue of native perennial food plants. Now, I just want to be clear that when I call these plants native, they are native to somewhere on this continent. If you're interested in finding out which plants may be native to your area in particular, you need to do your own research. But the virtues of these plants is they do provide food and habitat for native wildlife, birds, insects, pollinators, and the more native plants you have, the more habitat you provide for the natives. They're relatively disease-free and pest-resistant. Many tolerate a range of soil and habitat conditions, which is handy if you have some unusual habitats in your plot. They do require minimal care, much less pruning than some of the other plants that come from other places. They're resilient in face of vagaries of weather. And that's true of perennials in general compared with annuals. They go dormant. If there's a drought, they go dormant. And then when the rain comes, they leaf out again, whereas an annual plant will die, unless it's irrigated, of course. Many have multiple uses, and many occupy any one of the 7 permaculture layers. So if you're not familiar with them, the 7 permaculture layers include overstory trees, 30 feet and above, understory trees, 10 to 30 feet, shrubs up to about 12 feet, herbaceous plants, those that die down in the fall and grow back in the spring, ground covers, roots, and vines. And I'm going to give you examples of perennial food plants that are native perennial food plants that I'm familiar with from all of those layers. In fact, I'm organizing my presentation based on those layers, starting with the tallest. And many have multi-season aesthetic appeal. So, you know, if you're landscaping with edibles around your house, like a foundation planting or a bed in your backyard, I think aesthetic appeal is important. I know it's important to me. So as I go through these plants, I'm going to highlight their aesthetic appeal, often for 3 or 4 seasons. So I'm going to start with the overstory trees. So the first one on these are alphabetical. So the first one is the American persimmon. So this is a plant that's native to the mid-Atlantic states. It's an understory germinator. It tends to germinate in a forest, in the shady part of a forest. It can grow to be quite tall if it's a seedling, maybe 60 feet, but there are grafted varieties that only grow to 15 or 20 feet. They bear a fruit that's similar to Asian persimmons, but smaller and actually quite tastier, more intense in flavor. They ripen late in the season, and they need to be hit by several frosts before they actually get soft enough to harvest. Before then, they're quite astringent, but once they get almost mushy to the touch, they're sweet and luscious, like a sweet, tangy pudding. So this is the lower right is a picture of one of my grafted, I think it's a Meyer persimmon that actually is hardy to zone 4, clearly, because here it is in my zone 4 and fruited 2 years ago. I must admit it's been winter killed on during more than one season because the winter was just too harsh for it, but the roots remain viable above the graft. And so it came back vigorously each time. In terms of aesthetic appeal, it's pretty, with the fruit hanging. You can see upper right what it looks like with maturing fruit with the leaves. And then in the fall, some of the varieties turn beautiful colors. In terms of habitat, it needs good drainage, but it seems to be able to deal with any kind of soil. I have heavy clay, and it does fine under my circumstances. It can grow in partial shade or sun. So I've actually planted some on top of hugelkultur mounds I have in a woods, and I'm going to see their new seedlings. So I'm going to see how they do in a pretty shady environment. But since they're understory germinators, they should do pretty well. Maybe not fruit as well, but as far as growth goes, they should do fine. Okay, next one is basswood. So this is the left-hand shot is a picture of one that's growing wild in my woods on my farm. The leaves of the basswood, as well as the flowers, are edible. So you can use the leaves in salad, and you can use the flowers for tea. The basswood can grow, if it's in full sun, it can grow to be quite large, have a trunk like several feet wide and a huge canopy. But in the shade, which it can tolerate quite well, like deep shade, this is under an oak tree, it grows a more elegant form and doesn't get as large. So the right-hand lower right shows you the leaves. It tolerates a wet ground and shade, as well as sun and better drainage. So it's quite versatile from that point of view. And you can harvest leaves, the young leaves, for your salads. And of course, you have to think about when you have a perennial tree and you're eating leaves in your salad, how much more nutritious those are going to be than lettuce. Because of the extensive root system. Okay, now we're coming to the locusts. So locusts are native. In fact, the black locust, which I'm showing on the upper right in bloom, is actually considered invasive in New York State because it does sucker and spread, but it's a native plant in this continent. The locusts have many virtues. First of all, they fix nitrogen. Second of all, the flowers are very attractive to pollinators, and the flowers of the black locust are edible. So they form bunches like a bunch of white grapes you can see in the photo, and you can eat them raw, or you can probably make beverages with them. And also the honey is very delicious. So locust honey is quite valuable. The locusts also have very, very dense wood that has very high BTUs for firewood. And in the middle upper picture, they make great fence posts because they don't rot. And if you're certified organic, you know you can't use any treated wood for fence posts. So it's a great option to build fences from. It doesn't like soggy soil, but it can tolerate different types of soil, grows extremely rapidly. I planted some 1 foot high seedlings that were 15 feet high 3 years later. It makes a great trellis for other things, for vines. And on the left, upper left, there's a picture of a honey locust. All the locusts turn lovely yellow colors in the fall before their leaves fall. The honey locust has flowers that are attractive to pollinators, but also it has those giant pods that you can see in the lower middle photo. And when those pods first form and they're green, there's an edible substance on the inside that you can scrape off and eat. And that is the reason they're called honey locusts. The wood of the honey locust is similar to the black locust. The canopy, however, is quite a bit larger. So these trees can grow to 60, 80 feet tall. The canopy of the honey locust can be like 45 feet wide. The black locust is more like 30. So you need to space the honey locust quite widely if you want them to grow their full canopies. Lower left, all of these trees can be coppiced, which means you cut them off somewhere up on the trunk and cut all the branches, and then they grow back. And lower left is a picture of a row of honey locusts on my island that were recently coppiced. And coppicing actually extends the life of a tree. So that's a whole nother presentation. But I just want to show you lower right is a version of the black locust. It's called purple robe locust. It doesn't grow quite as tall. It has other similarities, but the flowers are a lovely magenta purplish color. So, you know, for aesthetic appeal, this would be my choice. Plus it's a little smaller if your space is more limited, but has all the other virtues of a black locust. I should mention that the black locust, a couple of negatives are, it does have thorns on the trunk that are quite sharp. And also it tends to sucker. Now that hasn't been a problem for me because I just cut them down when I see them. But for some people that can be a problem. And the honey locust also has very, very sharp long thorns unless you purchase the thornless variety, which is what I would recommend. Okay, so now tamarack. So tamarack isn't particularly a food plant, but I wanted to mention it because it has other virtues that can be very useful. So it's a deciduous conifer, so it loses its needles in the fall, and you can see the beautiful fall color in the lower right slide. Also, in terms of its aesthetic appeal, the pine cones are this lovely pinkish purple color when they first form, and then they turn brown. And the needles themselves are this lovely pale yellow, pale green, excuse me. So it's quite attractive. It grows extremely fast. It makes a wonderful windbreak because it grows so quickly. It does not tolerate, it actually is native to bogs. So it really likes wet ground. So if you have a really saturated area, this will grow well for you there. Like most conifers, it prefers full sun. Not terribly drought tolerant though, because it does like the moisture. So I wouldn't plant it on top of a hill that's really well drained because you might have issues. I lost a couple because I did just that. I planted them on top of a south facing hill. And one droughty summer, I wasn't paying attention and a couple of them died. It also, the wood also is very resistant to rotting. So it also makes good fence posts, and it also makes good corduroy roads. And it'll grow very tall. Okay, paper birch. So you're probably all familiar with these white birch. The food value is the syrup. You can make a delicious syrup that tastes different than maple syrup, but from tapping these trees, you tap them a little later than you tap maple trees, and the ratio of the sap to syrup is 100 to 1, whereas with maple it's 40 to 1. So you have to boil them a lot longer. But I actually think, I just thought of this as I was going over this presentation yesterday. I know that there's some companies that have done a really good business bottling just the sap and selling it. So you could probably just bottle the sap of the white birch also and market it and do well with the value added product. The white birch, I think, are attractive in all seasons. You know, they're striking in the winter, left-hand slide. In the summer, the white trunks with the green leaves are lovely. In the fall, they turn a beautiful yellow color, which you can see in the middle. And just a very charming, aesthetically pleasing tree, which you can tap. Okay, so those are the understory trees, which will grow to be between 10 and 30 feet. So the first one I want to talk about is the American plum. This is a native plum. The plums are maybe an inch and a half in diameter. They're not very big. When they're ripe, the skin is still very tart, but the interior is quite sweet. Edible, fresh. You can also process them into jams and pies. They bloom beautifully in the spring, as you can see on the left, and turn attractive colors in the fall. Oh, right. They can tolerate, they're often used to hold riverbanks. So they can tolerate like a water table above ground for short periods, like when a river rises in the spring. And they like to be close to moisture. I don't think they're too good in saturated ground year round, because I've grown a couple in those conditions and they don't do as well as this one on the left, which is right on the bank of a pond that I go. And it's very happy there. They do have some thorns, very versatile, you know, as far as the type of soil. No, you don't have to prune them. You know, there's really very pest resistant, just a great native fruit tree. And I know there are a number of other native plums, trees, but this is the one that I'm familiar with. Okay, hazelbirch. So hazelbirch is actually a cross between a native fruit of nut-bearing bush and a European bush, the hazel and the filberts. So one of them has bigger nuts, the other is more hardy. So the combination is very hardy for my zone, which is 4, and also produces good sized nuts. So it makes a great windbreak. They grow to be maybe 20 feet tall, and they have multiple stems coming up from the base. And if you plant them close enough together, they form a windbreak that goes from the ground all the way up. Also, the stems are quite straight, and you can cut them and use them for supports for plants like you would a bamboo pole. I think the nuts form in clusters, as you can see in the upper left, and I think they're quite attractive just hanging on the tree. And the tree also produces beautiful colors in the fall, as you can see in the upper right. Even in the winter, they have these catkins. They're related to the birch. So they have these catkins hanging all winter, and then early in the spring or late winter, they turn a pale yellow or a pale green as they start to produce their pollen. So even, you know, before anything leaves out, they're attractive in the landscape. And lower left shows you the nuts. Now, one issue with these, of course, is rodents, squirrels and chipmunks. Sometimes it's a challenge to harvest the nuts before the rodents get to them, because they usually get them before they're quite ripe. But I found that if you harvest them when the actual shell starts showing through the husk, and let them sit on a counter for a couple of weeks, they'll ripen on their own, and that way you can evade the rodents. They're quite tasty. nuts, taste just like hazelnuts, like in Nutella. You can make that out of them. You can use them, any way you'd use a nut. They're small, but they're tasty. And as I mentioned, the bush has other functions, including a really good windbreak and poles for garden poles. It in terms of habitat, it can grow in partial shade or full sun. It does like good drainage. It can, but again, quite versatile and hardy to zone 4. Okay, pawpaw. Pawpaw originates in the understory in the mid-Atlantic states, but it has a natural range as far north as southern Illinois and Connecticut. It looks very tropical. When you can see in the upper right, I don't know if my picture is hiding it, but it turns beautiful shades of yellow and brown in the fall, but you can see how thick the leaves are. And lower right shows you the leaves fallen under one of my maybe 8-foot tall trees, and they're very thick and they form great mulch just naturally. It is an understory germinator. So the center slide shows you if you're planting it in full sun, how at least a way that I chose to protect it from the direct rays. So I built a little screen out of slats from pallet slats. And I put the tallest one to the south, and I graduated them around because the sun is highest in the south and then it kind of comes down, so you don't need as tall ones. And I just left the seedling protected that way for the first couple of years. And then as it outgrew the slats, it was fine. I must say that in my zone, there are many grafted varieties that are allegedly hardy to zone 4. But in my zone, I didn't have success with any of the grafted ones. They all died. They just didn't seem hardy enough, but the seedlings did better. So the pictures I have here are of seedlings that were able to mature. The upper left shows you the flowers, which are quite interesting. Very dark maroon. They're quite large. They're maybe 1.25 inches across, and they're pollinated by flies. And you can self-pollinate them, and you can look that up if you're interested in learning how to do that. The fruits themselves are about the size and shape of mangoes. Look at the lower left, and they grow in clumps. And then when you cut them open, there are those dark brown or black seeds inside, and the flesh has the texture of like maybe of a banana, and the flavor is like of a banana custard or a vanilla custard. They're quite luscious. They don't have a long shelf life. So, but they can be frozen. The flesh can be frozen for later use, and you can, make smoothies out of them. You can make into pies, use them any way you would use perhaps a banana. You can make probably a papaya bread, not a papaya bread, a pawpaw bread. I have not had any fruit yet from my trees, but they have flowered, so I'm hopeful. My trees have been in maybe for 7 years at this point. So habitat, they can tolerate different kinds of soil. I don't think they do well in saturated soil, but they can do well in partial shade because they are understory germinators. Probably wouldn't fruit as much as in full sun, but you can grow them in a partially shaded spot. And I just think they're very interesting to look at in all seasons. And at least the seedlings, in my experience, are not that difficult to grow. Redbud. So the redbud is also native. It's a beautiful tree in all seasons, in my opinion. And the flowers and the pods, it's a legume, and it does fix nitrogen. The flowers and the pods are both edible. The tree blooms before any leaves come out, and these lovely pink flowers open along all the branches. So it's quite dramatic in the spring, dramatically beautiful. The leaves are heart-shaped. In the middle slide, you can see when they first emerge, they're red, and then they gradually turn green. And then lower right, yellow, different tones of yellow in the fall. You can see on the left-hand slide the shape of the trunk. It has a vase-like shape. And again, even in the winter, that vase-like shape is quite attractive. Does not like saturated soil. I learned my lesson. I planted two, one on higher ground, one on lower, and the lower one was just not growing as vigorously as the one on higher ground. So I decided to transplant it. And when I dug it up, the hole it was in filled halfway with water. And I said, oh, that's the reason. This is just too saturated for it. So I moved it to higher ground and it's been doing much better since. These also can grow in partial shade as well as full sun. They can stand alone as a specimen tree, or you can plant them in groups. They don't like wind, so you wouldn't want to expose them to strong winds, but in a sheltered setting, they can do well, as I said, in partial shade or sun. Okay, elderberry. So elderberry is a lovely shrub, grows to maybe 10 or 12 feet tall and equally wide. It has very shallow roots. It likes moisture. The flowers are edible and, oh, wait a minute. Did I miss one? Let me go back. Nope. Okay, previous. Nope. Oh, interesting. Okay, next. Okay, elderberry. This just shows you an elderberry in the landscape. They form a really good sound and sight barrier when they're in leaf. As I started to mention, the flowers and the berries are, no, wow, I'm missing a slide. That's crazy. Okay. Well, I had a slide of the berries and everything, but apparently it's not here. So the berries and the flowers are edible, but they do have to be cooked. So you can I know in Europe they use the flowers to make a syrup that they add to sparkling water for a summer drink. You can also fry them. You can batter them and fry them. The berries you can use in pies and jams. I've made pies with them. I've used them as a topping, like for cheesecake. And I've actually, to be honest, I've eaten them raw, just a few sprinkled in like a cereal, but it's best to cook them. They do like moisture, as I mentioned. They grow very rapidly. They will actually grow from the ground to full height in 1 year and flower. By the 3rd year, you need to start thinning out the branches that are older than 3 years, because they're going to die off by themselves anyway, and they're just not as productive. But from 1 to 3 years, they can be quite productive. They flower late, later than most fruiting plants, so more like late June. And depending on the variety, they might continue to flower through July and also continue to fruit late in the season. They're also very attractive to birds. So you can use them actually as a trap crop, because they're very productive of fruit. So if you put them on the outskirts of a garden and you have more valuable crops inside that mature at the same time, like grapes, for example, the birds might be more attractive to the elderberry than to the grapes. They can grow in full sun or some shade, but again, probably fruit better in the full sun, like most plants. Okay, next. Okay, aronia. So aronia is a native shrub that's extremely versatile. It can grow in saturated ground. It can grow in well-drained, dry ground. It flowers in the spring. It has attractive berries loaded with heavy berries, which are very easy to pick because they're in these big bunches and you can just grab them with your hand and pull them off. And in the fall, they turn beautiful colors. There are different varieties. I think there's a Nero that grows to about 4 feet, a Viking that grows to 6, a Mackenzie that will grow to 8 feet. They're totally pest resistant. You don't have to prune them. You might have to support them because they get so heavy with the berries that the branches can actually fall down to the ground. So you might have to support them with a stake when they're close to being harvested. They mature late in the season. September would be the time to harvest, and they're very astringent. The longer you leave them on the vine, the sweeter they get, but they still need to be processed and sweetened. I brought some fresh ones to a couple of chefs once. They go, ooh, they're so tannic, we don't like them. Then I cooked them up with some sugar and brought them, and they love them. They have a great complex flavor. They don't have a lot of pectin though. So I've made jams with them, mixing them with things like red currants that have a lot of pectin, or raspberries, and that works out really well. The only pests that I've noticed really loves them are deer. So if you have a lot of deer pressure, you might want to protect them. But other than that, extremely versatile plant, attractive in 3 seasons, edible berries, very high in nutrition, by the way. You know, the darker the fruit, the more antioxidants and other nutritional values. So aronia. It's also known as chokecherry, however. A chokeberry, not chokecherry, chokeberry, by the way, because of that astringency. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Beach plum. So the beach plums are native to the shore on the northeast shore of US. In fact, the first time I ever encountered one was in Maine. I took a childhood trip with my family there, and we bought some beach plum jelly home as a souvenir. I'd never seen the plant or the fresh fruit, but I decided to try them, and they're actually growing in my heavy clay, which is surprising because they're used to a more sandy, well-drained environment. But as you can see on the left, they flower beautifully in the spring, and they do flower later than some of the other fruit trees, so they're less prone to pests like that the earlier fruits are prone to. And then the fruits are about 1/2 inch wide and are quite prodigious on the bushes. And then they turn pretty colors like most, plums in the fall. I do some pruning. I prune them to open up the centers. And if there are any low-lying branches, I'll prune them off if they're too close to the ground. But other than that, they seem to do well surrounded by all kinds of ground covers, attractive in 3 seasons. The fruit itself has a very tart skin and a sweet center. I usually make a very viscous jam out of them, like the one I remember from childhood, and which is quite delicious. And it does grow large. It's about a 8 feet wide and tall bush. So you need some space for these. But again, if you have the space, it's a native fruit. Okay, all of the brambles are native. So raspberries, blackberries, and black raspberries. You're probably familiar with all of these. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on them. But they have slightly different growth habits. So the raspberries tend to grow straight and tall. The blackberries and the black raspberries tend to be sprawling, and the black raspberries will definitely root if you let them grow long enough to touch the ground. They'll send out roots there, and you can end up with a very, very difficult to get into patch if you don't trim them before they get down. They root. Although, if you want to expand your patch, you can just dig up the seedlings where they've rooted and transplant them somewhere, and you can propagate them. They propagate themselves essentially, so it's easy. And some forms of blackberries do the same thing. There are some blackberry varieties that are sprawling and some that are more upright. I've seen all of these wild around my area. Not so much blackberries. Blackberries aren't as tolerant as the cold. Well, actually, no, that's not true. There are blackberries growing wild on my farm. All of these grow wild on my farm. I've never seen the actual blackberries though, because I don't go to that area in the summer when they'd be ripening. But I've seen black raspberries and raspberries as well. They don't they don't like saturated ground. They do like moisture when they're forming fruit. If it's a drought time and they're forming fruit and there's not enough moisture, the fruit will be very, very small and seedy. But if they have adequate moisture, they'll fruit. Now the raspberries come in two varieties. You have summer raspberries and you have fall raspberries. The fall raspberries produce their largest crop on the first year growth, and they don't mature till the fall. The summer raspberries produce their largest crop in the summer on the second year canes. So I prefer the summer raspberries because most of my clientele are here in the summer since we're like a summer tourist area. But the fall raspberries are just as good if you're around to harvest them at that time of year. The blackberries tend to, I think there are two kinds, one that forms fruit the first year and one that forms the second. I haven't had success with the ones that form fruit the first year. My growing season just isn't long enough, but I have had some success with a variety called Triple Crown, which fruits on the second year canes. And I put it on a now this is only rated for zone 5 or 6 in catalogs, but I put it on a south facing slope, which probably is more like a zone 5 or 6 habitat. And I've had fruit many years, although the canes, the second year canes have been killed the winter before by a really harsh winter, and then I had no fruit. And that happened last year when we had a very harsh winter. But the roots remain viable. They came up strongly from the roots the following year. So I'm hopeful that this season I'm going to have some fruit. All right, that's enough about that. All right, just in the landscape, here's a shot of, the main picture is a shot of my garden with some raspberries in the foreground. And on the upper left are the blackberry leaves. Some of the blackberry bushes turn gorgeous, dramatic colors in the fall. Clove currant. Okay. Now, I know in New England, there are many municipalities that do not permit you to grow the European currants because they historically were a carrier for the white pine, a disease of the white pine trees. But clove currant is a native currant, which you should be allowed to grow. And it has wonderful berries that are similar to black currants, but not quite as pungent in flavor, similar to the European black currants. So let's start with the flowers. So the yellow flowers in the spring have a lovely odor that you can smell from yards and yards away. And they smell like cloves, which is why it's called clove currant. And then the berries form, they mature in August and they are delicious raw or fresh, or you can make them into wonderful jams or pies. And then the leaves, which are quite attractive in themselves because they're so complex in shape, turn lovely colors in the fall. Now, this is a bush. Crandall is the variety that I've grown. It's a cultivar. It grows only 4 feet wide and tall, and it sprawls a little bit. So it's nice on a little slant because it'll kind of sprawl and cover the slant. Almost no pruning necessary as compared to the European currants that have to be pruned on an annual basis. No pests that I've ever noticed. They can take full sun or they can grow in some shade. I've had them in very well-drained, drought-prone areas, and they've done fine. I don't think they like saturated soil that well. I did notice a native clove currant growing on the edge of a woods on my farm. So they will propagate by seed. Or you can take, I haven't had success propagating them from dormant cuttings, but I think I think it would be fairly easy to propagate them by taking a low-lying branch and securing it to the ground, throwing a little soil over it and waiting for roots to form. So I would highly recommend this clove currant for its aesthetic appeal, the wonderful fruits, low maintenance. Oh, here's elderberry. Interesting. Well, I already talked about elderberry, but here's some shots of the flowers close up and the fruits. That's very strange. High bush cranberry. This is another native, very wet tolerant. It's found on the edge of swamps in nature. Certainly hardy to zone 4, maybe even colder. Has covered, the bush is quite large. It'll grow to be 10 to 12 feet by about 10 feet wide at the upper part of the canopy. It tends to be narrow at the base, as you can see in the right-hand photo, and wider at the height of the canopy. Beautiful flowers in the spring, attractive to pollinators, of course. Lovely berries that start turning color in midsummer. And then the fall color, all those crimson, shades of crimson, gorgeous. And then the berries will actually stay on the bush if there's not a lot of bird pressure all winter long. And so they're quite attractive in the winter. The first few years I noticed that the birds returning, the songbirds returning in the spring would eat the berries that remained. The last couple of years we had pretty significant droughts in the summer, and there wasn't a lot of food in the woods. So I noticed that wildlife were coming in eating these berries before winter. But 3-season, 4-season attractiveness can tolerate very saturated soil. So if you have a wet spot, I planted mine in a spot where the water table is actually above ground for most of the year. And they've been doing really, really well and just attractive. And the fruit. So the fruit you can use like regular cranberries. Any way you use regular cranberries, you have to wait for several frosts for them to get ready to pick, and they're still quite tart. So you still have to, put a lot of sugar in, but you can use them the same as regular cranberries. And I actually think there might be a chance this could be a commercial crop if you have a really boggy area on your farm that you want to turn into something productive. This might be a choice. Honeyberries. This is one of my favorite native fruits. I hadn't even heard of it before I started, reading up on different fruits I could grow in my garden. This is a very, very hardy fruit. It's found like around the Arctic Circle. I think some of them are hardy to zone 2. But it grows well for me in zone 4. The fruit matures very early in June. So I think it compares favorably to blueberries because, first of all, it doesn't need acid soil. Second of all, it matures a month earlier than the earliest blueberries. No pest problems, no disease problems that I've noticed. The deer around my place don't even like it. I think it's because we have a lot of, it's related to the honeysuckle, and we have a lot of invasive honeysuckle in our woods. And I think the deer are just sick of eating the honeysuckle, so they don't even bother with these honeyberries. They're also quite drought tolerant, which blueberries are not. So if you don't have acid soil, which you would have to acidify to grow blueberries, I think this is a wonderful substitute. The only downside, in my opinion, is they're kind of tough to pick. They're down underneath the leaves, and it's very time consuming to pick them. Although there are varieties that you can shake and they'll fall right off the bush. And if you put a tarp underneath, you can harvest them that way, which is the way they're actually harvested commercially. They're also known as hascaps, and they've been grown commercially in Canada for quite a while, and Japan, and they're just starting to be grown commercially here in the States. They can take some shade. As I mentioned, they're drought tolerant, so they can take quite dry soil, and they'll still fruit. They're not that interesting in the fall, lower right, but in the winter, they have these collars type growths that grow along their stems. So in the upper right, even in the winter, I find that they have quite a bit of interest to look at. And as I think I mentioned, they can grow in partial shade or full sun. On the lower left, on the left-hand column is a shot of a row of honeyberries I have growing under pear trees. What else do I want to tell you about this? There's quite a few varieties. You need 2 different varieties for pollination. And there's a variety called berry blue, which is considered kind of a universal pollinator because it blooms for a long period of time. And some of the honeyberries bloom sooner or later. So if you have some berry blue mixed in among your other honeyberries, then they'll probably provide pollination for all of them. My favorite varieties, in my experience, are Tundra and Borealis. They have the best fruit that all ripen at the same time. When you pick them, they don't bleed. I don't know, they're just my favorites, but there are many varieties. And just to let you know that you have to net them, because early in June, when they start to ripen, the birds are very hungry. They're feeding their young, and they're blue fruits, which are very attractive to birds. You have to net them just before they start turning blue. And then you have to wait about 3 weeks before they're ready to pick. And when they're ready to pick, to eat fresh, to be at their sweetest, they puff out. So you can see in the lower middle picture how they're puffed out. That's when they're just at their sweetest. But the upper picture, when they haven't puffed out yet, you can still pick them then, and you can use them to process. They're not quite as tasty to eat fresh, but they're perfect for processing anything you would use for blueberries. How am I doing on time?
Depends on when you want, how much.
What time is it?
It is 9:53. How much time do you want for questions?
Oh, well, I'll hurry up then. Okay.
Well, no, I mean, I'd say we can leave like 20 minutes for questions. So we take 10, 20.
Okay, anyway, Juneberry. So Juneberry is another native. In the lower middle slide, you can see them growing on top of rocky ridges on my farm. So they do very well. That's the niche they seem to like in the wild. They like a well-drained place with not much competition. I found they don't like my heavy clay. I haven't had any successful fruiting in the 10 years I've grown them, although they are quite attractive in the spring on the left and the fall on the right. If you have a loamy soil, I think they'll do well. They also produce a blueberry-like fruit in June. You probably have to net them to protect them from the birds if you're getting good fruit. And of course, the deer love them. But other than the deer, they don't seem to have any kind of pest problems or disease problems, and they're quite attractive. And you can get them in large sizes. So I've grown some varieties, Princess Diana and Autumn Brilliance, that can grow to 20 feet tall. And they're quite attractive in the spring. And they also have an open canopy, so you can grow a bunch of stuff underneath. And they have a vase-like form that's even attractive in the winter. Northern Bay. This is, again, one of my favorite shrubs. So first of all, it fixes nitrogen. Second of all, it can tolerate very, very wet soil. Third of all, the leaves can be used as a flavoring, just like the bay leaves that you're used to buying dried. But I think bay leaves are semi-tropical, and this is hardy to zone 4. So you can harvest these leaves, and I've sold them to chefs who love having a fresh bay-like leaf. So they're great for flavoring and anything you'd use a bay leaf. They also produce a waxy berry that you can make the iconic bayberry candles out of. So it's a versatile shrub. It doesn't mind being pruned back. It'll grow back from the roots. It can grow to be 8 feet wide and tall, but if you keep it pruned, you can keep it to any size you want. And just the fact that it tolerates the wet ground, again, is a real virtue, because if you have any kind of saturated area, this will grow. And also, on the lower slide, you can see it sometimes actually holds its leaves through the winter. So it'll provide a little bit of color against the snow even then. Sand cherry. This is another native shrub. It likes, it's very drought tolerant, likes very well-drained soil, nice flowers in the spring. The cherries ripen, I think, around midsummer. You got to wait a while after they turn color before the flesh gets super sweet, whereas the outside stays quite tart. They get to be about ½ an inch wide, so quite large. And the bush is kind of sprawling, nice colors in the fall. Again, if you have sandy soil or if you have a high and dry spot, these probably might do very well for you. They are prone to that black knot disease, however, I've noticed. Okay, we're on to herbaceous. So the flowering shrub, oh, let me go to the next slide. Okay, anise hyssop. So anise hyssop is, I think, a native to the plains. It's a perennial herbaceous shrub that the leaves and the flowers are both edible. They have a distinctly anise flavor. It self-seeds and it also comes back. So it likes it high and dry, full sun. You can see on the right-hand slide, there's 3 bumblebees on these 2 flowers, very attractive to pollinators, attractive as a cut flower, and no pests or disease that I've ever noticed. Giant Solomon seal is another native. Many people, it's very shade tolerant. Many people grow it in their perennial gardens, shade gardens, but the middle upper slide, the shoots, when they first appear in the spring, are edible, and you can cook them like asparagus. So they also very shade tolerant. The flowers are pretty and attractive to pollinators. The upper right doesn't quite show how dark, how intense the yellow is that they turn in the fall. And just, just a neat asparagus type edible. Sunchokes. Sunchokes are native, a native tuber. So upper right shows you, there are many, many varieties, shows you the variety I've been growing. That's what they look like. The plants themselves are related to sunflowers. They grow extremely tall and they're herbaceous. So they grow to their full height in one season. They flower in September. And then as they die down, when they die down in late fall, you can harvest, or I usually wait till early spring. Because they sweeten up over the winter. They're high in carbs, and they also have a low glycemic index. So if they don't spike your sugar load in your blood, but they do disagree with some people. But anyway, I love them. I've used them in stir fries in the lower right. I like to make cut them thin and fry them like a sweet potato chip. I've also used them instead of potatoes in a frittata. So they're quite versatile, high carb vegetable that you can actually grow and a native. Strawberries are native. There's all kinds of strawberries, the wild strawberries lower right. Many of you probably have them in your farms. Alpine strawberries, upper left, are also native. And I'm just showing in the upper right a couple of cultivars with different color flowers. So you can get strawberries that have lovely fruit with deep red and also pink flowers. So for aesthetic appeal, it makes it a little different than the white flowers. Make a good ground cover. Also lower left in the fall, they often turn really nice colors. Violets. Violets are native. The leaves and the flowers are edible. Upper right, when they first come up in the spring, the leaves are quite lovely. They will self-seed. Upper left, they can tolerate drought. They can also tolerate moisture and shade. Lower left, you can see them growing up among some native horsetails. Just a lovely ground cover, edible. They will bloom in the spring and again in the fall. They self-seed quite thickly. So I've had beds where they've self-seeded over and over again and have formed a really good ground cover, actually under the beach plums. And here's a couple of vines. So we went through all the different layers and finally we're coming to vines. We had roots, we had ground covers, and now we're vines. So these are 2 native vines. The left is let's see, the right hand is hog peanut and the left is groundnut. So they're both legumes. The groundnut has beautiful flowers. It's herbaceous, so only grow to about 6 feet in a season, then die back. Underground, the groundnut has these strings of edible tubers that are about maybe an inch and a half long and an inch or 1/2 inch to 1 inch thick. They're very high in carbs and protein. You can cook them just like potatoes. And again, you harvest them late in the season or early. The hog peanut, they're both pretty moisture tolerant and can grow in shade. The hog peanut is naturally, it grows wild on my farm, and it's been naturally self-seeding on the north-facing slope of some of my hugelkultur mounds. And it isn't a problem. It kind of starts growing late in the season, and it's around a bunch of red currants, and it'll grow up the currants as you see in the right-hand picture. But that's after the currants have already been harvested. So it doesn't seem to be a problem to me. And then it dies down in the fall. What are edible in the hog peanut are the pods, the seeds inside the pods, and also very low in this insert is a picture of the kind of edible tuber that grows right next to the stem, just close to the ground or just under the ground. So both have edible parts. They're herbaceous. They fix nitrogen and grow in the shade. Okay, phew. So based on my 10 years experience growing my garden, I wrote this book that I think is available at the bookstore, at the book table at your conference. It's also available online. It has everything I've talked about in it and more. And that's it. So there's my contact information, and I welcome your questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Dani.
Okay.
So I'm sure we have plenty of questions. I have 2 in the chat here, and so I can alternate if folks online want to keep typing their questions in the chat. I'll be moderating that, and we'll do a back and forth. And the mic is right here, so if you want to stand up and raise your voice, hopefully Dani will be able to hear you. And if she can't, I will help do that. Okay. Dani, we have Karina in the chat is wondering if basswood is also called linden.
It is related to the linden. I think it might be, named American linden. Yes, it's in the same family. Yep.
Okay, great. I'll turn it open to the interest audience. Yeah, sure.
Oh, how is Dani supposed to hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right, thank you. Hi, Dani.
Hi.
Thank you for this. I have a house in South Jersey as well as in Massachusetts. So you were talking about the beach plum, and you said that you make them into jams.
Yep.
I'm teasing and chuckling right now because I'm, for the life of me, can't get the pits out of them. So that is a very
a good question. So what I do with those and other fruits like them with that are small and have a pit, I basically put them in a pot with a little water, and I cook them down until they get really soft, and then I put them through a colander. Okay. So the pits stay up and the rest comes out, and then I cook them again with sugar.
That's brilliant. And then the other question I wondered about, you talked about the groundnut and the hog peanut, and I know you had to go over it quickly. Is the hog peanut invasive? Is that the weed that I'm thinking that sometimes you'll find it and people mix it up? Think it's poison ivy, or is
yeah, it is. And I've read that it's considered invasive, but I've gotten so relaxed about things like this. It's come into my garden, and like I said, it doesn't seem to be a problem. Meanwhile, it's providing a ground cover and fixing nitrogen. And if I want to harvest it, I can. So I'm like relaxed about that.
Yeah, I mean, personally, myself, I think there's a time and a place for things. So if you put it in the right place, just keep an eye on it, then it probably wouldn't become invasive. It's when people plant it and then they forget about it, and then it, ends up, doing invasive things. So thank you very much. I appreciate this.
Okay.
Lenore has a question in the chat. She's wondering, how long does aronia take to gain size and strength? And would soil amendments help? Hers are only
how long does aronia take to do what?
Lenore, do you want to come off mute and ask your question?
Hi, Dani.
Hi.
Thank you so much for this.
Oh, good.
I have just a couple of aronia, and they're just not thriving at all. But it's only been a couple years, and so I'm just wondering what your experience is with, how long it takes for them to gain some size and strength, and would soil amendments help? They're just not doing
Well,
well.
I don't know about amendments, because I don't use them. I interplant plants that provide all the nutrients that are needed.
Well, like even that, what would be good to plant around them? They
Well,
just
where,
need, they
what
need
is the
help.
habitat that you have them in?
Well, my soil's really rocky. I'm in Amherst, Massachusetts.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
What if-
that's the zone.
Mm.
And what else do you, they are a little bit by the road, so I'm sure that soil is not great.
Mm.
Um,
Is there, are they getting salt in the winter?
they're far enough from the curb that I don't think they're getting salt, but that doesn't mean they're not.
Yeah.
Or at least
I
they, used to, not now. We don't have
Yeah,
snow
I don't know
anymore.
what to tell you. I've planted mine in saturated soil, in high and dry places, in shade and sun. They've done well everywhere. I have mainly heavy
Yeah.
clay. I just don't know what to tell you. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I would say try them in a different location.
Yeah,
Dig them
that's
up.
what I'm thinking.
This is what
Yeah.
I've done. If something isn't thriving, I dig it up and try it somewhere else. And
Yeah.
I've actually done that 3 times with one of my plants until I found a habitat that it was happy in.
Yeah. Yeah. It'll tell me, I think, if I move it.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Who's next? Yep.
So I'll just respond to the beach plum comment.
Yes.
So that's a species I grow, and I can use a regular cherry pitter to get the pits out. I have one from Williams-Sonoma, but they're very easy to find. And sometimes when you pick beach plums, the fruits are a little squishy because they're very ripe. And so a pitter is not going to work for those. And so those I put into a pot and simmer like Dani mentioned, but then I use a food mill to
Okay.
separate out. So if you all know what that is, it's basically a sieve with a crank on it. You turn the crank and that pushes all the pulp through, and then the pits stay back.
That's what I use, actually. I didn't know it was called the food mill, but that's what I actually use.
Right. Thank you. Thank you.
And your question about hog peanut,
Yeah.
if you're talking about Amphicarpia bractida, that's a native species, absolutely not invasive though.
Say that again. What was?
Amphicarpia bractida is the botanical name for it.
Okay, thank you.
We have other questions in person. I have a question for you, Dani.
Yep.
So other than your book, which I'm sure is a great compilation of resources, do you have any others that you recommend, like particularly maybe for our zones, or, for beginners, or maybe tell us a little bit more about your book and what that has been like for you?
Okay, I'm not sure. I can tell you more, but I'm not sure of the other part of the question.
Yeah, I guess just like resources for folks who want to learn more and like go into more detail. I mean, you gave us such a great generalized.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, learn more about what though? So my book is called The Homeschool Forest Garden: How to Plan, Plant, and Tend a Resilient Edible Landscape. So basically, I'm telling you how to plan the garden, and it can be at any scale. It can be a foundation planting. It can be, an edible hedge or windbreak. It can be a bed in your backyard with one fruit tree surrounded by other edibles, or anything else you can think of. Or it can be a more ambitious plot, like you have a 1/4 acre you want to plant, 1/8 acre, 1/4 acre you want to plant in edibles. And it basically, it tells you, it's based on, I'm not a permaculturist, but it's based on the permaculture ideas of integrating. It's modeled after a forest edge. So basically, you're using all the vertical space. If you only have vertical space up to shrubs, that's what you use. If it's like a foundation planting and there's a roof above. But if you have the space and you can go all the way up to the overstory, you can plant tall trees, short trees, shrubs, and everything, down below, and have all of those layers, which increases your productivity incredibly. And then you build in other plants that provide the nutrients that are needed, like nitrogen fixers. In my book, I talk about 25 different nitrogen fixers, and I mentioned several today that you can integrate. So the nitrogen needs of your food producing plants are provided by other plants. Then you build in other plants that pull up all the other nutrients from the subsoil. That certainly fruit trees often have shallow roots. They can't reach down there. but you can do things like comfrey and other, they're called nutrient accumulators that pull up all those other nutrients. And then as they die down in the fall or the leaves fall, all those other nutrients are available to the other plants. And then you build in all kinds of plants, including your food producers that attract beneficials and that deter pests. So all of that is provided just like in nature. In nature, nobody weeds, nobody cultivates, nobody sprays for pests, nobody does this, that, you know, nature does it all. So that you're trying to create a garden that simulates all of those natural functions. So over time, even though there's a lot of work involved in planning it and establishing it, over time, your labor diminishes while your harvest just increases. And that's what my book's about. So in addition to explaining how to plant it, I have a whole middle section that talks about all the different plants I have experience with for all the layers. There's over 100 that I describe. And then in similar way that I described the ones I talked about today. And then the last section actually gives you examples of combinations of plants. I have sketches and I have some photos that show you some of the different designs that I've just come up with. And, you know, and then I talk in detail about what worked and what didn't. I own all my mistakes in the book, so hopefully you can benefit from that. And so it's just a way to inspire you to do something like this at whatever scale you're interested in, and giving you lots of concrete examples and information to do it successfully.
Awesome. Zoe, you had a question.
Yeah, I'm wondering, you mentioned that your fertility plan is a lot rooted in planting nitrogen fixers and comfrey, and but do you amend or do you like add compost or organic matter every year?
Good question. So initially I put a lot of compost down, or semi-composted like yard waste that I collected from a summer colony nearby, and also a lot of wood chips. So until the ground is covered with something growing, I use leaves and wood chips on the surface, and they naturally compost in place. And I continue to add wood chips to certain places, like under my raspberries on an annual basis, and wherever I see bare ground. I think I'm not being super successful with some of my fruit trees. So someone who's more expert than I am in this suggested that I spray with some nutrients. So this spring, I'm going to try that, seaweed, an emulsion of seaweed and maybe, some other things combined, and spray the trees and see if that helps boost their nutrition. But other than that, I haven't, my berry bushes have done just fine. All of my berries, other than the June berries, which don't like my soil, have done just fine with the nutrition that's available through the other plants, and through, the leaves fall and they're providing, and then as your garden matures, you have a lot more leaf fall and a lot more herbaceous plants that are dying down, and all of that is nutrients that are going back into the soil. Plus, heavy clay is a very nutrient-rich soil compared to sand. So I have to think about that too.
Right. Yeah, we have another question over here.
Hi, Dani. I have a question about seeds. So I was gifted some pawpaw seeds. A friend of mine's going to start those, and I'm probably in for the long game for that, right? In terms of 5 to 7 years, maybe before fruition. And I'm wondering, of all the plants you mentioned today, are there other good seed starting sources there, or better just to jumpstart ahead to some seedlings and plants?
All right. Well, I think everything in the cherry family or plum family can be started from seed. I have actually successfully started, I'm so proud of this, I talk about it in my book, a red bud from seed. Locust, I've started locust from seed. I think some of the other plants better started with dormant cuttings, or what do you call it when you put it down on the ground and then you, you know what I mean? Anyway, that way. The herbaceous plants, most of them self-seed, or you can start easily from seed. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Yes.
So I have another suggestion about a book. is a brand new book that's come out, and it's called Wild Plant Culture, A Guide to Restoring Edible and Medicinal Plant Communities. It's by a guy named Jared Rosenbaum, who runs a native plant nursery in New Jersey, in the Delaware Water Gap.
Great.
And I have a copy, I haven't read it yet, but I've met him and I've been to his nursery, so I think he really knows his stuff.
Great.
Also a NOFA New Jersey member too. That's where I came from, so yeah.
Okay.
I would definitely recommend that USDA website
What
if
is
you
it?
want to learn about more native plants.
What is it?
Oh, I gotta find it. It's in the resource section of my book. Also, if you want other references, if you go down, if you don't even if you don't want to buy my book, there's a whole list of references that I've used in the back. So you can just scan through those and take notes of anyone that seems useful to you. It's USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, plants.usda.gov. That's the website. Okay.
Other comments? So great information about paper birch. I just want to let people know that any birch tree can be tapped for sap, any species of birch. So down here in Massachusetts, we've got a lot of black birch, got a lot of yellow birch. You tap them the exact same way that you would a paper birch.
Great.
Yeah. We have a question here.
Hi, I have a question about the birch tapping. I've actually tried doing it. I think it's been like 7 years when I did it, and I tapped too many. And I just want, if you try it, you really don't need to tap. They produce a lot of sap, so it flows a lot. Also, I boiled it and it became so astringent I couldn't use it. It didn't work. And I was wondering, I think it's the fructose, like the sugar, it's different than maple. Have you ever tried it?
Yes, I've done it. And yeah, I was getting a gallon of sap in an hour
Yeah.
from each tap. So yeah, so they really touch. But yeah, but as Danny said, you have to boil the heck out of it to get it anything. And yes, so eventually what I got, and I tapped black birch trees, I got something that looked and tasted just like molasses,
Ah,
which is great, but molasses is so cheap and so easy to get in the store. My advice would be just go buy molasses. But you know, if you want to do it for fun, you know, you could. And also, what I tell people that might be like camping during the time of the year when birch sap is flowing, like in April, that would be Massachusetts. If you're concerned about the water, the quality of the water supply place where you're camping is you can tap all the birch trees, get all the pure clean.
Oh my God. That's such a good idea.
And also use the birch, go back to your molasses. In the composting process, it has very good bacteria in it. So it will help compost too. So if you tapped too many birch trees, you didn't know what to do with the extra birch syrup. We use it in the compost process curbside. So I thought instead of that store-bought molasses, we make our own.
you know, that makes me wonder if you're tapping a bird, if you need to spray your fruit trees, I wonder if you could spray it with birch sap.
Oh my God.
Oh,
Cool.
You know, for nutrition. Yeah.
I have one last, maybe like, and this might be like your little wisdom dump, but what are some of the either like challenges that you've faced as a perennial gardener, and like some of your greatest successes that you'd like to share with folks?
You know, I'll start with the success I mean, just the bounty. I mean, you know, and the reduction in labor. I mean, I've been a market gardener, and I had 3/4 of an acre at one point that I was working, and this is an annual vegetables. That's dawn to dusk for the entire growing season for handwork for one person. My edible forest is an acre, and if I spend 3 hours 2 or 3 times a week, it takes care of it. Huge difference in labor. Now that's not in the establishment. I'm just talking about maintaining it. It's also more interesting because, you know, the annual vegetables, it's the same, I don't want to use a swear word, but, you know, thing year after year. Whereas with this, The garden is evolving, and it's fascinating to watch how it evolves and, you know, what the plants want to do. And it changes. And, you know, your observations change and your labor changes as time goes on. Okay, failures. You know, I've had a lot of things die on me. There's a picture in my book of all the labels, like it's just part of the labels, like a big pile of labels of things that die on me. So, I mean, I'm not successful with everything I try, but I keep trying. And I've had an issue with quackgrass. So I broke my elbow 2 summers ago and I couldn't weed. And then the next year I was writing the book. And so the quackgrass got away from me and it invaded some of my beds. So now I'm trying to get rid of it. I can't dig it up because I don't want to destroy all the soil life in the bed and everything else around. So I'm re-sheet mulching and hoping I could knock it back that way. If I had it to do over again, I would probably build some kind of barrier, whether in plants. I'm experimenting now with plant barriers, like some of the alliums if they're planted close together, can form a barrier against things like quackgrass, and also daylilies, and there are other plants that can do the same. So I'm experimenting with that. But if I had it to do over again, I would probably install those first thing, and possibly also build in some artificial barriers to keep the quackgrass from invading. But it's kind of too late. So that's one, you know, besides everything that died on me. Yeah, but you know, I've been pushing the envelope. So I'm zone 4. I've been trying to grow things that are zone 5 and zone 6 just to see if I could do it. I'm trying to pair them with habitats that microclimates that would be conducive to their success. And so I've had some successes and some failures in that.
That's
Is that
great.
enough
So much.
answer?
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. We have one more really quick question. I hope maybe Deb in the chat says, when to cut back raspberries? How do you
Good
tell
question. Excellent.
if you
Yeah.
have a summer or fall variety?
Excellent. Okay, you got to cut back the spent stems as soon as they're spent. So the ones that the summer variety, so that's on the 2nd year canes, as soon as they're done, get them out of there, because you need to have good air circulation among those raspberries to prevent those horrible invasive fruit flies and other diseases. So get them out of there as soon as possible. The other pruning I do is in the spring, before anything's leafing out, like late winter, spring, when the snow's gone, I prune out all of the dead, let me see, the ones that were fruiting. Let's see, I thin them. So I thin them. I thin those canes that grew last year to 3 or 4 for every square foot. I take the tallest, the straightest, and the strongest. Those are the ones I leave. I get rid of everything else. And then I clip off the tops where they flowered or fruited in the fall, because my summer raspberries that you know, the 1st year canes actually fruit. I have a variety called Prelude that I grow that fruits twice. I have a wonderful summer crop, and then I have a slightly smaller fall crop. So I cut the tops where those fruited or flowered. I have another variety, Nova, that flowers but never gets around to fruiting because the season's too short. So once I thin them, I cut those tops off, and that's it. And then again, when those when they fruit in the summer, as soon as they're done, I get them out of there. Does that answer your question?
Deb's in the chat, so I'm not sure.
Okay.
But I think that.
Okay.
Okay, great. Yes, definitely. Yeah. Okay.
And that's in my book too. I mean, I talk so many details about how to care for these things are in the book too. So anyway, is that it? Are we done?
Yeah, I'm just gonna say a couple of things. I'll turn this back on me. It's
Can
really
I just
awesome.
thank everybody for attending?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you guys. You've been great.